Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of WeKnowSeverance.com here on RHAP. We Know Scripted TV. Make sure you're subscribed. We Know Severance wherever you get your podcasts. You'll never miss an episode of this show. And you can write into us, severancerhap@gmail.com, which we sure appreciate so many of you doing here for our Theories and Feedback show, which we're getting into today for episode 2 of season 2. Something about saying hello, goodbye to Miss Selvig, Miss Copel.
Mm-hmm.
I just
very Beatles of you. You say goodbye and I say hello. This is goodbye, Mrs. Selvig.
This is goodbye, Mrs. Selvig and Dr. Amanda. This is goodbye to goodbye, Mrs. Selvig, as this is our second of 2 podcasts about the episode.
Yeah. It's I mean, I feel like this has been a great week of speculating about Severance theories. I have multiple group chats on fire. The Reddit is bumping. Yeah, I mean, people are not ready to say goodbye to goodbye, Mrs. Selvig, but people are definitely ready to say hello to what comes next in this season of television.
Melissa, how many group chats are you in about goodbye, Mrs. Selvig and Severance generally?
0. I am in 0 group, other than like the one that the 3 of us have. Like that is it. Yeah, this podcast right here is my group chat. But still, like, Blue Sky is the Discord chatter is happening. So I'm still pretty around a lot of discussion around the episode, which is pretty great. And I'm ready on this pod to unpack the things we know to be true and speculate about lots of things that probably aren't.
What do we know to be true? We know that that Rickon's book is very profound.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. and is I can derive great meaning from it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yep. We know that to be true. We know to be true that there is pervy security cam footage of Mark and Helly making out in the hallway. Mm-hmm. That's true.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We don't yet know whether to be true if that's Helly or Helena who comes down the elevator. But I think we could say we know it to be true that Helena was the one watching that footage.
Yeah.
And we could say we know to be true that Irving uses a telephone in this episode.
Mm-hmm. We also know to be true that there is a new opening credit sequence, which has a lot of little nuggets within it. And I thought that the feedback show would potentially be a good place to unpack some of the new little delights that we have in this opening credit sequence.
If not now, when is the question
when
that I have. So we're going to do that. We're going to unpack the opening credit sequence. We'll get into some other theories that we have, that you all have out there through the various different ways that we are able to engage with Severance, whether that's through our email that you're sending in to severancerhap@gmail.com, or if it's on the Reddits, which Amanda, I know you're all over the Reddits.
I descend there like I'm going into the severed floor.
Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that like Reddit is is it a descent to Reddit?
I think it's definitely a descent.
It's a descent. Yeah.
I think it is probably a descent. I think ultimately a descent. We will also, of course, talk about anything that we learned from the Severance podcast, the official Apple podcast.
I got tagged personally in a follow-up on that one, so I got very excited.
Oh, what did you get tagged in? What happened with you?
Let's just say that Zach Cherry's theories for the next episode were very personally profound.
Okay.
Oh. We all actually got tagged. I don't know if you saw this by the official Severance podcast. Are you guys aware of that or no?
I don't think so.
By the official Severance podcast.
Yeah, the official Severance podcast had a quick shout out for us. Here, we could let the greater We Know Severance podcast listeners hear all about it right now.
Hi, I'm Adam Scott. I play Mark S. on Severance, which you likely already know since you're listening to We Know Severance. Josh, Dr. Amanda, and Dr. Melissa, Ben and I know that you guys love Severance, and now you know how much we love what you guys are doing there. So I just wanted to come over, say hi, and hello to your fans, and also let you know that we launched a podcast too. It's called The Severance Podcast with Ben Stiller and Adam Scott. To get ready for the Season 2 premiere, we recapped all 9 episodes of Season 1. You can listen to all of them now. And starting January 17th, we're putting out an episode every Friday following the Season 2 premiere. We've got amazing guests from the cast and crew, and even a hotline where you can call and leave questions for us. You can find the Severance podcast with Ben and Adam on Apple Podcasts, the Odyssey app, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, quick shout out. And I hope things are going okay over there. Because if you guys have...
Please give them a chance, guys. They're new podcasters just starting out.
You know, because we know Severance, of course, here on the We Know Severance podcast. We know podcasting too, and we know how hard Severance podcasting can be. So we wanted to say thank you to Adam S for reaching out to us with that sweet little message, and also good luck to him and Ben.
I really hope that takes off. I hope that they get.
You know what? I think those two guys have quite the
kids.
career in front of them. I think that.
Yeah. So hopefully it works out. And if podcasting doesn't
good podcasting, great audio on that. I mean, I was going to recommend the microphone I got on Amazon, but I think they have a pretty good setup over there.
Yeah. I think they're not going on Amazon. They're getting Apple products, right?
Probably.
They're going and getting that stuff. So quick little shout out from the official Severance podcast here on We Know Severance.
That's basically up there with the coolest thing that's ever happened with Ben Stiller adding us on Blue Sky. Like, I don't know.
Yes, indeed.
Adam Scott
all right,
said our name. I don't know.
I heard that. I know
from this moment anymore. Yeah. I'm very stuck in that.
Yeah, I need to get a doctorate though. It's hard for me to just like
it's
it's like
it make you feel less than?
Dr. Melissa and Josh. You know, like I just need like some sort of salutation.
Whenever I talk about this podcast, I'm like, it's like 2 neuroscientists and then Josh, who's like an expert in television and storytelling. And so I think that you bring important expertise to this podcast, just like we do.
I bring important expertise to the podcast as the son of famed geneticist Michael Howard Wigler, who has been in my DMs with tons of feedback about Severance. He's Cold Spring Harbor Laboratories' very own Dr. Michael Wigler.
Where does he stand on clone theories, Josh?
I have not gotten into clone theories with my father yet, though I would really like to. I do think it would be very fun to get my dad on the podcast, though I don't know that I would want to subject the two of you to speaking with him because, like, if it goes south, I can handle it.
We can handle it. We've been talking to men in academia for many years.
Totally fair. Very fair. Some of his questions that he sent to me are he's really in the story. He's not thinking so much about the science of it. He says, why is Mark important? What is the story with Mark's wife? Is Kelly R faking her innie?
That's what I want to know. What is going on with Kelly R?
He said, what's happening with Kelly R? To which I told him we're asking that, and we're not asking what's happening with R.
Was that the purple Kelly? Is that Kelly R?
Purple Kelly is Kelly R. She works in the purple department. I believe
Kelly
she quit.
Not appearing on this film.
Pretty sure she quit. Okay, a little bit of a loopy start to the theories and feedback show this week. I think starting with the credits is a great place to begin. Have you both gone back? Have you watched it? What are some of your takeaways from it that we should be bringing in? And I'm sure that the internet has done its thing as well.
Yeah. Well, first of all, on the official Severance podcast by Adam Scott, who you just heard, and Ben Stiller, they talked a little bit about how the credit sequence was partially inspiration for the balloon scene opening in episode 1. And if you remember the season 1 credits, there's a part where Mark is like holding what looks like a balloon, but it's made up of lots of other marks. And that kind of was this inspiration that Milchek would have these balloons. And you see that the kind of head balloon theme is really prominent in the season 2 opening credits. I love this credit sequence. I actually think that it even surpasses for me the Emmy-winning credit sequence from season 1. But there's so much stuff in here to get into. One of the things that you see is like, again, like season 1, we have Outie Mark in his red pajamas and Innie Mark in his business attire. And like, they seem to be wrestling. We see Mark go into his mind, like go into a brain. And which immediately evoked in me that perpetuity wing quote from Keir, I went into my mind and tamed the tempers. So Mark is walking through his own brain. He seems to be searching for something with a flashlight. We see a lot of imagery where Miss Casey's figure and Helly's figure seem to flip back and forth. So in this mind traveling sequence, he casts a shadow that at first looks like Helly, and then it flips to Miss Casey. And every time he shines a light, they scurry away. We see a lot of imagery that looks like it might be getting at this reintegration concept, like Mark kind of pulling the severance chip out of his own brain. We also see Irving's face on a coffee cup.
Oh.
And that coffee mug is filled with what look like little brass instruments. So like trumpets and trombones and tubas. And I don't know if I'm naming all of my instruments correctly, but it's filled with
some defiant instruments potentially.
Yeah, potentially.
A coffee cup full of defiant jazz.
What is it, like Exultant Big Band? Or I don't know. It could have been something like that. There's also a goat on a projector screen that turns into a goat in a business suit. There's Arctic landscape imagery. And then we have to talk about these little babies, because there's 2 different little babies that we see in the course of this opening sequence. In like one of the first parts, we see like Outie Mark waking up in bed, and he's surrounded by what you have very accurately described, Josh, as boss babies.
A small army of boss babies.
The army of boss babies. But at the end of the opening sequence, there's a different baby. It's not a boss baby. It's a Keir baby. This baby like has hair and looks like Keir. It's a different kind of baby. It's got the beard. It's got a beard. It's a bearded Keir baby.
Wow.
It's only one. It's not like an army of boss babies. And what I will say is this was something that Mr. Ben Stiller and Mr. Adam Scott lingered on in their podcast when they were talking about the opening sequence, that this was very interesting, that there was a little baby Keir at the end of the credit sequence.
Yeah. Well, I think that, we've been hearing about Melissa, the revolving, and I think that we have been speculating since season 1 how much of this is, like a means to an end of resurrection, right? Like a means to a return, like means to a beginning. Do we think that is the plan to give Keir Egan a little baby body? Is that what we're moving towards here?
Maybe it's certainly one of those things where the more and more we get into the story, the more the clone theory seems more reasonable, which is not something I would have said in season 1. Sure. But I'm less and less resistant to clone the more we
just the way the clones like it. The clone takeover.
Yeah. Commit to the clones.
We do not obey the clones in advance, people. Okay.
But I think that there's 2 potential options here, right? So there's the idea that we just straight up cloning, right? So DNA from somebody, embryos grown up as baby, and then you get like a new version of that person. But I think the idea is that it would still be, while it would be a clone of the original, it would not actually be the original, right? It would be just like another version of them. But I think that probably more fitting to this show would be the idea that if you could sort of capture a consciousness, as amorphous as that idea kind of is, into a severance chip and then implant that into a baby and then grow up a new body with the same consciousness, something along those lines, so that like Kier himself could revolve into like a new body but still be him. All of that jumps a little far down the like possible, given our current scientific like the severance chip already is certainly steps beyond anything that we can do, but I think it all kind of relies upon our current understanding of how everything works. I think that this idea would be jumping quite a few steps down the road, because like consciousness is like a whole thing, is basically our kind of experience, and both the biological and the psychological experience of the world. So there's not like a physical aspect to that in the same way that we can kind of talk about systems of memory. So I don't know. It's certainly possible. I'm not like putting it past the show to say that that technology has been invented and kind of follow through on the logical conclusions of that. And I think that there could certainly still be interesting. I think that there's still a basis for that within the story that wouldn't feel like it's jumping the shark or anything like that. But yeah, anyway, that's my thinking, is that there's like two potential options there.
Yeah. I prefer when my science fiction is just sort of just
on Earth.
Beyond is on Earth. I do. That's true. I prefer it on Earth. I'm very anti-space, but I prefer when the technology is sort of just beyond what seems plausible in our world. And then once we get to that point, there are still limitations and rules that govern how far we can go. So, I've said before, I've been pretty glib about clones, and Miss Casey is a clone, and there's another clone, and is Mark's clone in the hallway. And I think that all of that has been in good fun. But I think that I would prefer if there is like an overall mission of Lumen that is imagining this future that might not yet be possible, and is very much doggedly pursuing that, even if the technology isn't quite there yet. But I absolutely believe that the intent is that there is some immortality that will be attainable for Kier Egan or the other Egans in general. And this is like so heavily themed in the show. When you think about the perpetuity wing, what does perpetuity mean? It means perpetuating ad infinitum. And the idea that Kier Egan could live through the lineage of CEOs, and this idea of revolving, maybe that consciousness is actually revolving from one Egan to another in an endless chain. We know we've met James Egan. He's very strange. Could he be somebody who has been, experimented on in this neuroimplantation line of research? I think that even if that technology has not been perfected, I think it's something that the Egans and that Lumen is very, very interested in.
Yes.
And I think that that's like the ultimate mission when we ask, what is MDR doing? I think the intent of what they're doing is refining this process of perpetuating the consciousness of the Egans, of Kier in particular, and maybe others, into new bodies and new hosts, so that they can sort of live on and enjoy their power into the future. So that's very much where I am. And I think I would prefer if their mission is somewhat foolhardy, and that technology is maybe not where they think or need it to be.
Well, that's very I don't want to spoil Mr. Robot, because if anyone hasn't watched Mr. Robot and is listening to this, and you're like, okay, well, Severance is on right now, but when season 2 ends, it's going to be a decade before we get to watch it again. I kid. We'll come back sooner than that for sure. But a show that I think would scratch some similar itches would be Mr. Robot, if you haven't encountered it yet. And Mr. Robot plays with some of this a bit as well, like an incredibly wealthy, powerful person who has like a theory, right? Like, and has invested extraordinary resources into the theory. And is the theory like just that? And like also like a reflection of a sad person's incredibly financed ability to push the limits
Right.
of science in an incredibly exciting, also terrifying new direction, or is it a foolhardy quest? And I the answer to that question we don't need to get into here. But
Mhm.
for me, a thing that I could see happening right now is, I think if this technology already exists, right, and if there is like an ongoing revolving that's been happening where like James Egan is like the sixth inhabitant of Keir Egan's
Right.
consciousness. That feels like, then what are we building toward, right? Like I feel like
Mhm.
that idea and like that advancement has to be the thing that we are building toward. And to your
Right.
point, Amanda, like, is it actually a thing that they'll be able to do it all is a great
Right.
question. And I would love if the answer to that is like, no, you dummies, you can't do that. Like, but also like I could imagine like James Egan fully believing it. And I could imagine James Egan like fully believing that he is some form of
Right.
Fear Reborn. Because again, like increasingly the way I'm watching this show is that the goats are fun and all this stuff is fun, but it ultimately for me is metaphor. And ultimately,
Mhm.
like the Egans are like fucking lizard people, right? Like these
Yeah.
are like,
Mm.
you know,
Right.
these are the people who like are like thrilled with the way things are going right now, and like have this like
Right.
very like diseased, broken sort of manifest destiny idea
They should
about.
put a topical salve on that.
Exactly. I think it is a topical salve, unfortunately. Topical, certainly. And I think that the idea of like somebody who believes that they are uniquely situated for this, or are like gloriously fated for some form of excellence like this, really tracks with some of the types of people that we see in our world who have this level of power, who have this level of control. So
Yeah.
I really like the idea that it's what they are going for. I really like the idea that they may even believe in some sort of like, we are like, we have this holy purpose that's already occurring. So we are just pushing it towards its logical conclusion of us being able to live forever. And I also love the idea that that hasn't happened yet, and ideally won't happen at all, because that's a crazy batshit idea that can't happen at all. But of course, you would invest all of the world's finances and research into living forever. So I think like that really fits with sort of my understanding of like the abuse of power and like the ultimate goals of people that are this powerful, the ultimate level of like detachment, not just from like empathy and like reason that these people are, but also just like how disconnected from reality these people can become. So on a metaphorical level, as well as like a story level, I think it works really, really, really well for me.
And part of the consequence of having this much power and wealth is not what can you actually do, but what can you convince people that
Right.
you can do, and what can you get people to believe. And the other aspect of Lumen that we've clocked from season 1 is how this has this religious and cult-like overtone as well. And there's plenty of cults and, depending on how you feel about religions that convince people that something like perpetuity and revolving and that there is some kind of immortality that you can achieve. And this is sort of fused this kind of capitalist technological pursuit with this religious fervor to convince some people, maybe the Egans, maybe the Lumen employees, maybe a larger cultural influence. We know it's controversial, but that there is this ability for a very sacred, virtuous person to be to continue to exist and be the person that's like sending messages. And this is what made me think about the board and Drummond. So like, if this idea of immortality and perpetuity of Egans is the goal, or is what some people believe, we haven't seen the board in the flesh. We've only seen them talk through surrogates. And again, this is very like religious, cult-like. God speaks directly to these particular appointed people, and then they spread their message to the unwashed masses. And so far, we know that the vessels for the board's messages have been Natalie and Drummond. And one thing I noticed on the Adam Stiller and Adam Scott and Ben Stiller podcast, please give it a listen, folks, if you haven't heard of it.
New podcast.
They talk about Dan Erickson. They sort of joke that he's a brain in a jar, which seems to be a running joke. And very much we get the vibe that the board are brains in jars, right?
Totally.
Like we don't see them, we don't hear them, they don't participate vocally in meetings, and they only speak through these surrogates. So my question is the conceit of the board that the board is the lineage of former CEOs of Egan family members that we got to see in the perpetuity wing? And in some sense, they have preserved them. They have these little chips or something. I don't know if is that true in some sense, maybe, or is it just a fiction that is used to perpetuate this broader mission of Lumen?
Or we're carrying the genetic legacy of them. So like Helena is the board, right? Melissa, she represents the previous Egan CEOs or whatever.
Yeah. I was reminded of, because we talked about this in season 1, and then Josiah brought it up again, this like brains in jars board idea. And I think that it's because I'm trying to think of back when Keir was CEO, like the severance chip wasn't a thing yet. And so I do think that but what would have been a thing was like formaldehyde. And so I do feel like maybe there are just like preserved brains in jars,
like the Walt Disney cryogenic,
yeah.
This is rich people have been doing this,
right?
Yeah. So yeah, it definitely feels like the most likely thing, and that there are just these speakers. But to me, one of the most interesting things about that is, if that is the case, it doesn't feel like Cobell, for example, knows that, right? Because she's trying to talk to the board. And Natalie has to tell her. So it feels like that is a very specific secret within Lumen that is not necessarily a part of the greater kind of mythos and like religious purpose of Lumen. This is sort of there, like an even further step down that path, which I think is just an interesting of like, who knows, who doesn't, where. Yeah. And then the actual, just like, what state is that happening in? Because I think
state of P.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Physical education.
Just because I'm trying to think of what the thinking there is, right? In terms of how do you capture a person and try to preserve them post death, and is the like preservation of the physical, like biological brain or body sufficient for that? I don't personally think that it would be, but I think that there is reason to believe that people could be thinking that way.
Well, I think that the show, there's a lot on the show canonically already to indicate the importance of literature and teachings, right? Like it's not lost on me that Dr. Rickon Laszlo Hale that he broke literature and like broke something at MDR as a result, or that at on the severed floor, that the rules are so stringent and strict that everything that you are consuming is a Lumen product, including the ethos, including the teachings of Keir Egan and the tempers and all of his like various ridiculous quotes and whatnot. And so there's a part of me that's like, is like the perpetuation of Keir's idea.
Right.
Is that another way? Like, if we can just like really distill what this guy was all about, are we going to be able to keep this guy alive? And then maybe someday literally translate all of that ethos, all of that philosophy, all of those teachings combine it with, future science, because I don't think you could call this modern science, and like pseudoscience, and like turn that into like some sort of continued living being, whether it's in the form of a flying Kier Egan on a computer screen, or potentially Kier Egan achieving his ultimate goal of being reborn as a boss baby.
As a boss baby, the ultimate goal. Yeah, since you mentioned literature, I just want to connect another dot there, that we know that Gemma was a professor of Russian literature. And I think, some of the themes of Russian...
to get a doctorate. Maybe that's my doctorate, so that I can contribute something at, on an intelligent level.
Then you might be a target as a host body for Lumen, though, because that's what they go for. But yeah, I mean, I'm not a doctor of Russian literature, but I did read some of those books in school. And I mean, some of the themes are just social injustice, class struggle, suffering, and the human condition. Like, there's a lot of existential philosophy in Russian literature. Like, I think at the minimum, it sort of signals that Gemma was a very intelligent and sensitive type of person, which I think we get through Mark. But I also think that to the extent that these thematics are coming into play, like when you think about the revolutionary spirit that we're seeing in the innies, I think that definitely ties into some of those literary themes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And brushing up in contrast to the very like capitalist engine that is Lumen.
We got some feedback just while we're on the subject of Russian literature doctor Gemma. And this was specifically addressed to the two of you as doctors. This is from Emily F. This is a very minor thing, Emily writes to you two. But if Miss Casey is Gemma, then not only has Lumen stolen her life, they have taken away the title she earned in her studies of Russian literature. As someone months away from my own doctorate, she says, I'm an ABD in theater and performance
Congratulations.
Studies. It's hard not to notice that they don't just dehumanize Gemma, they strip her of her achievements.
Yeah. That's Dr. Casey to you.
That's right. Yeah. Literally the title of this email is It's Dr. Casey.
I love it. I love it so much. I think that there's a big movement in like, it's definitely something that gets talked about in kind of academic social media in terms of putting doctor in front of your title, because so often the case is that in interviews and that kind of thing, men will be referred to by their title and women will not. And it's definitely like an interesting commentary there as well of like who gets given that respect. I struggle sometimes with this like sense, because then I think it can go the other way and people will carry around a doctor title and then speak expertise about things that they actually have no expertise about.
Right.
And
like I just did with Russian literature.
Right.
But
you have a podcast.
I'm thinking,
it's allowed. It's allowed to speak with a feeling of expertise.
I'm thinking, the Jordan Petersons of the world, right? Your Dr. Phil's. And so I think that there's, so I personally sometimes struggle with the title. I also, as someone who has a PhD in an area that sounds medical, sometimes I have, my greatest fear is to like be on a plane and people be like, there's a doctor. So I like, I don't put doctor whenever I'm like booking an airplane ticket, because I'm like, they don't need to know. Unless you want me to like look at pictures of brains and tell you and like name parts of them, I can't help you. So
if anybody needs to implant a severance chip, Melissa will get closer than your average bear. I think. I think
but
that
if someone
we've
needs
learned
to like tend to your broken arm, I think go to a hospital.
Yeah.
Do not call me.
Since we're talking about Gemma and Mark, I mean, there's a lot to get into with that. I do want to point out that like the polyamorous love quadrangle or whatever it is between Innie Helly, Outie Helly, Innie Mark, Outie Mark, Gemma, and Miss Casey is like potentially going to get very, very complicated.
Yeah, just in how you described it with the words you used.
That's part of it. Yeah. Yeah, because all right, can we talk? where do we want to go? Do we want to start with Helly or do we want to start with Gemma? Josh, what do the listeners want us to do?
We've got a lot of feedback. We got this feedback about Gemma that we just got into. We've gotten some really good feedback about Helly from a longtime listener, Helly L. In fact, Helly L. Wrote in and said, you folks are one of my favorite Severance podcasts. Love the neuroscience. Love how much you love Dylan. She's the best. Uppity is what I think that misogynistic Lumen guy called her. But please, for the love of Keir, say Helena Egan's name right. It's Helena. Emphasis on the first syllable, not Helena.
Oh, nope. Helena Egan.
Helly says, no one ever gets my name right. So admittedly,
so sorry.
It's a sore spot. We also got that feedback from Mitch on Blue Sky about 3 minutes ago. Same thing.
We're saying
yeah, and can
Helena
I just
wrong.
also say, like, we're juggling a lot. You try podcasting. Like we just told the podcast novices, Ben Stiller and Adam Scott. Yeah. Podcasting is hard work. We're juggling a lot going on. Apologies if we mispronounce a name, but if that's going to be a deal breaker for you, find another show. Is what
Helena.
Anyway, why don't we go to Helena? Let's talk about Helly.
So I saw this great comment on Reddit, and this was from Redditor A Confused Cocoon, and they pointed out, like, let's recontextualize the awkward hug between Helly and Mark when she descends back to the severed floor. And we can talk about whether that is Helena or whether it is any Helly. But if we think for a moment that maybe Helena elected to go back to the severed floor as her outie, we initially might have thought that the motivation was she's going to be a saboteur, right? That she's going to go down there and she's going to act as a spy. But now we've seen her very, very intrigued by the footage of Innie, Helly, and Mark kissing. And this Redditor points out that in episode 1, when Helly runs out of the elevator, Mark hugs her and she hesitates before hugging him. The prevailing thought was that she felt maybe grossed out about the Helly Mark thing and had to get in character. But after watching episode 2, this might have been the first loving hug Helena has received in years, and she was just in shock for a second, which is tragic. She's probably not been surrounded by anyone who's truly cared about her as a person. So I think that this is a really good point, that there might be a conflicting motivation within Helena to, one, maybe be portraying her family's interests and trying to do what's best for the company. But I also think that there is something very intriguing and alluring to her about the camaraderie and genuine friendship and romantic connection that her Innie has been able to achieve on the severed floor. And one of the things that I think could be really interesting to see unfold over the course of this season is, we watched Innie Helly radicalize the rest of her MDR colleagues, and now we might see the rest of those MDR colleagues radicalize outie Helena, and that this could be like her transformation. And I think that it's possible that this was Chekhov's throuple that Milchek mentioned in the first episode, and that instead of Miss Cobell pursuing Mark's Innie and outie in what might be termed as a throuple, I think that maybe Helena Egan is pursuing Mark's Innie and outie in what might be referred to as a throuple.
Now, I also have dabbled in some Russian literature in my time, and I do believe Chekhov wrote, if you put a throuple in a drawer in the first act, they have to bang in the final act.
Oh man,
I think that's right.
Yeah. A couple things with this theory. So Jim posted a point that I thought was super interesting, that there's a high-pitched sound associated with the severing process that you hear when Mark, Dylan, and Irving go down the elevator that you basically don't hear when Helena goes down. It sort of gets cut right before you would hear it, specifically to leave us questioning, which I think is very interesting. But the other thing that I thought was interesting about what you said is I think that there's this element of season 2 that I'm going to be very curious about finding the ways in which the innies are actually this different version of who they are on the outside. And the person that this most speaks to for me is Dylan, because again, I think it was Ben and Adam talking about how innie Dylan has this like sense of purpose that outie Dylan doesn't, that outie Dylan has a lot of responsibility, but is sort of lacking a way in which to, like, anything in which he can like put energy into. It's just about like sort of trying to make ends meet for his family versus like having his own sense of purpose and achievement. And so I think that maybe the idea of like the things that the innies have that the outies are still seeking, I think is maybe another thing that could sort of be consistent across some of these characters.
Yeah. As for the elevator tone observation, there is an excellent Reddit post by user Lonely Island who or Lonely Land, I'm sorry. Who actually
Adam
yes.
a different Adam S interested in Severance.
And
Andy S, my apologies.
And what this user actually did was kind of picked up all of the elevator transitions across all of season 1 and season 2 and put the notes
love
on
this
the
show.
screen.
I love this fandom so much. That's so great. That's so awesome.
Amazing. It's very and then did a summary of the transitions. They're marked by 2 distinct tones, G and C sharp. Sometimes a B flat is used, sometimes a B sharp is used, and that maps on to certain things. So I definitely recommend that people look at that. The other amazing thing that people have to see is the cut that a user has made. I don't have this one up, but it was also posted in the Discord, a Redditor who took the innies coming back to work from episode 1 and cut it right up against the outies coming back to work from episode 2. Ben Stiller and Adam Scott talked about this on the podcast, that Sam Donovan, the director of episode 2, and Ben Stiller worked very closely to make sure that timing was exactly right. And it's amazing that you can track from episode 1, them entering the elevator, and then the time for them to go down and exit the elevator on the severed floor. I recommend everybody check that out. But yes, Josh, this fandom is amazing.
Awesome.
And it's great when people put this amount of time into something and then it pays off. It's like, oh, it's such a beautiful symbiosis between very, very careful creators and very dedicated fans. It's like, it's a beautiful thing.
Well,
and
go for it, Melissa.
I was just going to say that I think that people can be this dedicated and dive this deep because there is that much thought put into it in the first place. And Dan Erickson did an interview with The Guardian where he talked about basically the lessons that he learned from Lost, which felt very relevant. Also, apparently there are a lot of, I've never seen Lost. There are Lost numbers all over the show as homage. So yeah.
Oh, Lost numbers. The numbers are
scary.
There was
a point.
Numbers. Yeah.
There was a point that Miss Casey was alive for 108 hours, which I guess is a number. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know things.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Anyway, basically he talks about that it was really like a ambitious, high concept, like new thing, and is very careful that he's not ragging on Lost, but that basically that they were learning as they go. They had many more episodes a season to do, but for him, it's really about planning in advance, set the rules of the world. We know what the company's intentions are. We know what the end game is that frees us up to play. We can have these funny, strange little diversions, but we know we're not going so far off track that we can't come back, which again, is just so lovely to hear the creator of the show be like, I know how it ends, everybody. It's like, excellent. Then I have so much confidence that we can dive this deep and that it's all going to pay off, or at least the effort and the thought, not that every single theory we come up with, not that every single like path we follow down, but the idea that you can speculate about this because there will be, they want you to speculate about these things. That's the whole point.
So where are you two at right now on whether we have Helena on the severed floor or Helly?
So we got more feedback on this, and I thought that this was really interesting. This is what I was going to say before, is like, so you can go and you can like comb through like all of the various different ways the show is like planting sound cues that like
Yeah.
music notes could like clue you in on something. Like that's amazing. That's fascinating. And I also, as somebody who loved Lost but have my issues with it, that I have resolved, which has been nice. But know that Dan Erickson is like really big on Lost and wants to do what that show did really well here in Severance. Like all of those are reasons to like think about, like they must have been putting a lot of thought into this question that we all as an audience are having right now, which is why we're even having these conversations. Like if it is as simple as like it's just Helly, I think eventually just like time will bear out that like obviously that's Helly. If it's Helena, there will be a reveal. Like that's the difference for me. But the other piece of it is that like people love this show so much that they're not just like looking for those things. They're trying to like logic it out from the perspective of the characters. So this was from Scotty R, who wrote in, and Scott said, one reason why I feel it is likely Helena and not Helly back in MDR is because I am guessing that Helena, the Egans, and the board would not want Helly R sharing with her fellow innies who her outie actually is. And like that just feels like such a simple, clean explanation for like why that doesn't feel like that would make sense to send Helly back.
Yeah. I said this on the feedback show from last episode when we were joined by the great Grace Leeder. Follow her coverage on parade.com. But that it's hard to imagine the utility of continuing to have Helly as part of this. Like this was a PR stunt. The PR stunt failed. She was a very, very difficult person to deal with. She tried to harm herself. She basically radicalized her whole office. So you got to imagine that like from a just management standpoint, why continue to introduce that chaos into the system when the principal reason for doing it, because it was supposed to be some amazing PR stunt, has already failed. So I think that it's clear that the principal reason for bringing all of the MDR employees back to the severed floor, including Helly R, is because they need to keep Mark happy enough to refine Cold Harbor. We noted that they say the name again, so they really want to make sure we notice it, even though you don't have to make sure because we're all paying very close attention. We're on it.
We're on
although
it.
Josh's dad has not been paying close enough attention to realize that it's Helly and not Kelly, but a lot of us are. So they want us to notice that this particular file is important. Can we talk a little bit more about Cold Harbor and why Mark's work is so important and obviously mysterious?
It's definitely mysterious, and it at least feels important to Lumen. But yeah, is there anything for this episode that we feel like advances Cold Harbor theories? For me, like, and so my surface read on it is just like it's a big enough deal that they said it with spoken aloud words in this episode. But as far as like advancing what exactly it is, I'm still no further than I was last week, I would say. Melissa, how about you?
I'm not further on in terms of like the Cold Harbor. I think we've speculated and I feel pretty good about our speculation around what it is. I think the interesting thing for me is the fact that the thing we get confirmation about in this episode is that Mark is the only one whose work matters. This is not a company-wide process. This is Mark is the one that they are focused on, and the others are just there, maybe doing similar work, but maybe it is not to the point. Like there's clearly a test case going on, and that is Gemma, and Mark is the one involved in that, or Mark is the test case and Gemma is the like exposure that is that they're testing, right? So whatever that is, the thing that is interesting that I don't know that we've necessarily had any sufficient information about is it's not all of them working on taking the swear words out of movies. It is Mark working on it, and the others are maybe also doing that, but not to the same extent, or they're just doing the busy work and they're just there basically to keep Mark happy and make him feel like he's a part of this office environment and he's not just like working alone in a cubicle all day.
Yeah. I think one possibility is that Mark is the only one who's doing something mission relevant, and then the others are either controls. So maybe they're doing something similar and they're monitoring differences between Mark and other refiners, or maybe they're doing the same thing that Mark is doing, but they've realized that Mark is just better at it and that they accelerate their progress much more. Like Mark is, I don't know, I think that this is like a sports stat thing, like an above replacement refiner, and like everyone else is dispensable, but like he's the one that is actually advancing their mission, and they've made a breakthrough with Mark on the team for the first time. And I think that we get a little bit of a nugget that might suggest that because, you know, Mark wins that crystal head cube. He refined like Allentown faster than anybody had done it before. So I think that Mark is special. The question is, was he selected to be special, or was he discovered to be special? And then like, this is where I was starting to think more and more about what the heck is going on with Gemma. Because the other thing that we learned in this episode was we got a little bit more clarity around her accident and her alleged death. And again, if we go with the principle that
details, right?
We got some details. And if we go with the principle that like, it would be better if the explanation is sort of just beyond what is currently possible rather than some like magical Deus Ex Machina kind of technology, then the fact that Gemma is existing on the severed floor makes me think that she didn't die in that accident, and that the body that Mark identified is not Gemma's body, and that possibly because of the extent of the injuries, it was not easy to identify. So like, was this an opportunistic thing where they so like, I'm guessing that maybe what Lumen is doing is taking people who have kind of extreme, like very serious traumatic brain injuries. Maybe they're in a minimally conscious or a vegetative state, and then they're doing something to try to rebuild a consciousness within them. So is Gemma somebody who's in this like state of post-traumatic amnesia, and they keep her in some induced coma for most of the time and then kind of pull her up?
This was a question that we had from Tamar F, who, just to paraphrase it, basically was like, is Gemma existing in like some sort of like, you know, like state between alive and dead? Is this like, you know, basically that exact thing that you're talking about right now?
So, so I mean, I think that it's possible that they've had people who are in these kind of states. Maybe this is Harmony Cobell's mother, Charlotte Cobell, we saw in a bracelet, that they've had people who are in these states, and then they use the refiners to do whatever this process is. And they just kind of opportunistically had this scenario where one of the refiners was the spouse of one of these test subjects. So one theory is that Gemma is a very important test subject because she has a connection to Mark as a refiner. There's a little bit of a question of, could any of this have been orchestrated by Lumen? Did they stage an accident? Did they have their sights on Mark? Like, was Mark somebody who was identified a priori? So that's sort of where my thinking is about Gemma Miss Casey theories right now.
I have a really random, very dark addition to that. So if they had to identify a body that would look enough like Gemma that Mark could identify, albeit burnt, could that explain Miss Wong on the floor because it was like her mother? Oh. And then it's so because they're Asian, but they don't look, but they might look enough alike.
So you're suggesting
like
the existence of a third Asian person in this universe.
Crazy. I know. Crazy.
They're all connected. Yes.
But, and then now she has no like parental guardian or whatever.
Interesting.
And like, so is that their connection as opposed to her being like Mark and Gemma's daughter or whatever?
So we've got questions about Miss Wong this week as well. This was from Hikes, who said, could Miss Wong be a clone, and her young age reflects or points to the origins of a Lumen cloning program? Or do we think that it was Milchick who hired or chose Miss Wong? Then Hikes does add, by the way, randomly, if Gemma was killed in a car wreck, surely it was Ms. Cobell who killed her. She's a horrible driver.
She drives angry. She has road rage issues.
Yeah, very interesting. I also have another very kind of tangential theory, but this was brought up in the viewing of Severance within my apartment and point of discussion raised. So I cannot take full credit for this myself. But basically this idea in reminding us of the O&D cards, this idea that like perception could be altered on the severed floor. And while that would be a different part, it would be, the back of the brain, not the sides. Basically this idea that there is so much that we can do to sort of alter perception. So for example, there are these really awful, sad experiments of the past where like cats, like baby cats were like, I'm sorry. We're raised in
for a bit. See you in a minute. Just kidding.
Yeah. They were like raised in darkness, so they never developed like vision, basically. Or there's situations where like if you aren't exposed to lines of like a certain like you're never exposed to like horizontal lines as you're growing, you like fail to see and understand horizontal
the perceptual
lines and,
cells and the connections that you need to actually understand that visual experience, they never develop. Very interesting. So you're saying that something on the severed floor could be
so this idea that in some way the things that we see on the severed floor are not actually what we see, and whether it's the fact that this O&D card that what we saw on the card was not actually what was on the card, and that's why Milchick was so focused on it. Maybe the goats are not actually goats, and then maybe Gemma does not actually look like Gemma, but that there are these kind of perceptual tricks being played.
She's a mirage of sorts.
Exactly. Yeah, she's some other person, but her face is sort of perceptually altered for Mark specifically. I don't know. This all feels like it's a big stretch, but it was it fit with some of the like brain stuff. So I thought it was interesting in that way.
But would that how would that interact with the ending of this episode and Mark finally asking Miss Cobell, does this have something to do with my wife? And that being the thing that seems to like trigger her finally and get her to like drive angry and drive away, right? Like,
I mean,
is it because like you're like, because like it feels like that level of reaction just feels to me like so wrapped up in that being Gemma,
Yeah,
of course.
Fair enough. I don't actually totally endorse the theory, but to me, the part of it that I thought was interesting was the O&D cards. The fact that like maybe what we saw was on those cards was not what actually was on those cards.
Right.
I think that once we start projecting this further to Gemma, it falls apart a little bit. But the idea just that we know we can't trust what we are told occurs on the severed floor, but also potentially that we can't trust what we see on the severed floor.
Yeah.
But it could also, I mean, like you could just imagine like the camera technique and like the filmic style of like the moment that we find out that that's not Gemma at all. And it's just like someone totally different. And like we swivel around John Locke style to shout out Lost again.
Yeah.
And like it's no longer Deacon Lockman there. And it's like, I don't know, Laura Dern.
Oh, I would love that. I would love Laura Dern showing up. That would be great. While we're talking about Gemma, I did want to mention just the Persephone reference because we were podcasting right after the episode and we noticed that this like is the in Greek mythology, Persephone is queen of the dead, wife of Hades, spends half of her life in Hades and half of her life in the world. And you two mentioned the Eurydice and Orpheus myth, which I also think is like super relevant for the themes of this show because it's a story about a man going into hell to rescue his dead wife, which is like exactly what Mark is doing. And Persephone, the queen of the dead, figures largely in that myth as well. So I mean, the Gemma and Miss Casey and Helly and Helena of it all, Mark has got his hands full. I mean, this is like Betty and Veronica to the, 10th power.
Very interesting.
Very interesting.
Let's talk about Miss Cobell. This is sent our way from Mr. Roybot. Speaking of Mr. Robot, Mr. Roybot writes in and says, So I think we are looking at Cobelvig becoming a Lumen whistleblower out of pure
very useful
spite.
nomenclature, by the way.
Yes, indeed, out of pure spite and revenge. She's a very smart and motivated person that's been fired, lost her home, and excommunicated from the religion she's been a part of since she was a child, according to the Inside the Episode feature. And most importantly, she's unsevered. So I can only imagine the kind of information that she's privy to. But I also think she'll be lone wolfing it since she isn't much of a team player. So with her doing that, Mark and Irving's outies and Devin digging deeper and the rebellion brewing with the innies, Lumen might face attacks on all sides. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out. Melissa, do you vibe with this idea of that's the next step for Cobell is like going full whistleblower against Lumen, or is it more complex than that to you?
There's certainly that option. I could definitely see a situation where Cobell believes that like Lumen has lost its way from like the path of Kier and is trying to undermine it in order to like, I don't know that we're seeing Cobell no longer following that ideology, but there could be ways in which the company itself, the current leadership of that company, she believes has lost its way and is trying to undermine it for sure. Yeah. I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't really see a like tight fivesome on the outside of like Cobell joining in with all of these outies, but perhaps there is some contact with Irving, for example, who appears to be up to something sneaky. So yeah, there's certainly an interesting option there, and it's whether it's full like whistleblower or if it's some sort of like more kind of undercover undermining that she's trying to do.
I love the idea of Cobell ending up being a flawed hero in all of this. Like, I think we know enough about this woman to know that like she is a morally dubious person. So I don't think that she's going to be extremely noble. So Cobell, but not Nobel. But I do think that she has been harmed by Lumen. And I think that she is somebody who is very bought in and has sacrificed a lot for a mission. And to see her potentially grapple with that worldview being shaken and where that puts her in relationship to Mark and the other MDR employees will be really interesting to play out. And I love Patricia Arquette's performance so much. I love every line of dialogue that she utters. I've been like walking around my house muttering, "We serve Kier, you child," over and over again.
And how did the children react to that?
You and Kristen Bell, right?
I wish I had Kristen Bell's chops, but I do what I can. I do as well as I can. While we're talking about Cobell, this might be the best time to introduce this theory and represent this point of view. One of the delights of Severance being back on the air is that Colin Stone, who former guest on this podcast, now texts me every day after being dead to me for many years, for the 3 years that the show was not on. And now he's reemerged and it's amazing. I love it.
Still on the couch, I assume.
Still on the couch, I can only assume, but he's very locked in to season 2 and he's very locked into the podcast. And he has been from the start a very big proponent of the transatlantic accent theory that Cobell and Irving both speak in a very deliberately old-timey kind of accent that's been called a transatlantic accent. Some people call it a mid-Atlantic accent, which drives me crazy because I live in the mid-Atlantic region of the US and that's not how we talk. But it's supposed to be, it's this very contrived accent that was like an upper class US accent that was supposed to represent what you would speak like if you lived directly between the United States and Europe in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And Colin Stone has been like really, really in on this being a very important piece of the Severance puzzle. And he shared with me a Reddit post by Textbook Eccentric that is also on the transatlantic beat, saying, I've noticed that Irving and Miss Selvig both share what sounds to me like a transatlantic accent. And I wonder if that's a clue about having those relatives inside their minds somehow. Like we get a little bit of detail about Cobell's mother or relative named Charlotte. And we know Irving had a father in the military. So are they the test subjects in experimental revolvings where their relatives' consciousnesses were transferred to them, or they are their older relatives? So I had to put this out there. And I think that we can all agree that this accent choice is going to be the key to all of Lumen's mysteries.
I think that's likely. I think that
really
we could see that.
When John Turturro was on the Ben and Adam podcast, they did bring up Irving's accent, but it sounded to me like it was a choice that John Turturro made that Ben Stiller was quite surprised
that's
by.
a strong choice.
Yeah. And then I think they very quickly were like, yes, of course, this is what Irving would sound like. So I'm not sure that it's necessarily a plot device, but who knows?
Who knows? This could be a good segue into talking about Irving. Josh, did we get any feedback about Irving?
We didn't get any specific feedback about Irving this week and what Irving in particular is up to. But we did get a lot of love from Mr. Pants for Irving and specifically about Irving and Bert and saying that not since Hannibal Lecter grazed Clarice Starling's finger through the bars of his bird cage has there been such a simultaneously charged and tender touch between two people on any screen as was portrayed by Bert and Irving. And I love that from Mr. Pants, but now I can't stop thinking that Christopher Walken is out here trying to eat John Turturro's brain.
What a comp there. That was a very, interesting.
We go in a few different directions.
Yeah.
What is the internet thinking about Irving this week? Because he's riveting right now. Not that he's not ever riveting, but right now, a lot up in the air. About it.
There was a big thread on this on Reddit, unsurprisingly, by Redditor Gar, who started the discussion. So as I mentioned on our recap podcast, people are coming to the consensus that Audie Irving has been trying to communicate something to Innie Irving. Right. And he says very much that I want you to know my Innie got the message. So there's theories that Irving and somebody and there's a lot of speculation that this somebody could be Audie Bert, that Audie Bert and Audie Irving have been in communication for a long time. People are noticing that the locker tray that they use before getting in the elevator, that Melissa, you took note of this, that Irving also has a watch that he changes. Somebody speculated that maybe Audie Irving is using that watch to communicate via some kind of code. There's been speculation that maybe in his previous post at Lumen, he had some kind of unsevered job, possibly a higher up job, like in Mr. Milchek's level of management. So the big question I have, there's two, I think, that in the very little Irving that we saw, one of them is, who is he talking to on the phone?
Right.
And the second one is, what is the status of his relationship with Bert? Because we know that those two saw each other in Audi form before that we pick up our story with Irving at the door with Mr. Milchek. And we don't have any idea what actually transpired there. So did they see each other and recognize each other because they've been colluding on the outside for a while? Or did they see each other and exchange some information? Do you two have any theories about who is on the other end of that phone line with Irving? Melissa, what are your thoughts?
So my first thought is that it's Ragavi, and
I
this
was
is
just gonna say, yeah.
yeah, that this is the return of that. One thing that was
That sort
pointed
of
out,
does need to return, right? Like we can't just
yeah,
let that whole plot line with PD die.
yeah, exactly. There was a point, I can't remember if it was Ryan or if it was Ben, but apologies if I'm misremembering who it was, but somebody pointed out that like Bert and his partner were packing when we see them. And so just pointing that out, that, you know, obviously he's not talking to Bert on the phone, but that there could be some, like, there's been some sort of, we don't know the situation of Bert and Bert's Audi life, that they, you know, maybe they're moving, maybe they're, who knows. But yeah, my guess is that he's talking to Ragabi or some other like member of some sort of Lumen resistance. And the fact that Bert is like watching him in that scene makes me wonder if they are not on the same side of this like outer situation, because yeah, if Bert doesn't want Irving to see him, like, I don't know. I'm just nervous. I'm nervous that Audi Bert and Audi Irving aren't going to be friends. And I don't know.
Yeah. I think if it's not Ragabi, then I'm always a fan of the answer to a question on a show like this being a new character, right? So like there's still a lot of cast that has yet to be unfurled, like people who we know are going to be on the show this season based on announcements, like John Noble, who's an incredible actor. That could be really fun if he's going to play in some kind of role like that. I think like the idea that Irving's in touch with people who are investigating this stuff that maybe we don't know about yet, I think is an exciting thing. Or like, could we get like some sort of gosh, remind me the name of the woman who works in O&D?
Felicia?
Yeah, like an Audi Felicia, that could be fun. Like, you know, like I do like the idea of like a flip version of somebody.
Then he missed the opportunity to say bye, Felicia.
Bye, Felicia. You know, hi, Felicia, and bye, Felicia are 2 back-to-back episodes coming up. So like something like that could be really fun. Could he be in some kind of cahoots with Miss Cobell? You know, is another thing
interesting
that's on the mind. You know, and that could like connect those characters better. So, because I can't think of any Irving and Miss Cobell having much, if any, real kind of relationship.
But part of what is fascinating, I think, is if we know that Irving had worked at Lumen as an unsevered employee, I think that opens up the possibility that his Audi might know some of the other Lumen players that we don't know. And that's probably how he has access to some of the records that he does have. So it's interesting to think that somebody higher up in management, maybe a Miss Cobell, maybe somebody else, obviously not Mr. Milchek, but that he could have had a pre-existing relationship that he's capitalizing on.
Yeah. One last bit of feedback that we got is actually about Milchek. And this was from Sean, who wrote in and said, "This could easily just be editing, but it's weird when the episode was so sequential otherwise. The scenes of Irv and Dylan being fired by Milchek were interspersed while literally every other scene went in order. Does this add credence to the idea of multiple Milcheks that we floated
Milcheks, wow,
back in season 1? So Milchek clones on the table because he was able to talk to Irving and Dylan at the same time?
Well, I'll tell you what Reddit is talking about. This is user Redditor Choo Choo, who has the spoiler theory: Seth Milchek is a vampire.
Yeah.
Consider this: we've only seen Milchek outside of Lumen Building at night. While visiting the innies, he has to wait to be invited in before entering. So
That's
Pretty
fair.
strong.
That's incredible.
support
Is that
there.
what the kelp is for? Is to ward off the
Oh,
vampires?
yeah, like
In
garlic,
the universe
kelp,
of,
yeah.
of Severance,
Mhm.
kelp is akin to garlic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe
This could be a
any
garlicky
flavorful
kelp.
seasoning. Yeah.
Yeah.
You get a garlicky kelp going and some bonito flakes, and you got
Mhm.
yourself a miso soup base.
That's it. That's it.
Mhm.
There was an interesting note for me when Ben and Adam were talking about the initial scene, the like running through the hallways and whatever, and then the figure that appears in the back. They
Yeah.
described that figure as looking like Mark, which I was like,
That's what I think too.
I just saw that it was like someone in a suit. Like it was
Yeah.
to
It's
me
not
that easily,
Milchak. Yeah.
but yeah, but that was how they pointed it out, which I thought was interesting. And
Mhm.
so it's one of those where like, was that a clue? Was that just a like ominous note to start off the season on? But I thought that was
Right.
just a very specific comment on their part, that it was not just like somebody in the background, but that it was somebody who looked like Mark.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
maybe there's multiples of everybody.
Yeah. Possible.
I guess.
What else we got before we close this thing out? Melissa, you got something
Yeah.
on Zach Cherry.
Yeah, so it turns out that Zach Cherry and I are destined to be BFFs because he has
Oh.
I
referenced.
couldn't be less surprised. Like that makes sense. to me
Yeah.
in a big way. Yeah.
Basically all I'm saying is Zach Cherry, please reach out. But back in the day, back when I was a baby podcaster and I'd never done any PSN
Back when you were a
podcasting
regular old
before,
Adam Scott. Yeah.
back when I was just a normal outie, had no podcast any, I was asked to cover a particular movie series with one Kevin Mahadeo of The Mighty Ducks, a movie that I had grown up watching all three of. We covered the 2 seasons of the TV show, and at the end of the Ben and Adam Stiller, but I'm combining them as well. Ben Stiller and Adam Scott podcast. Zach Cherry predicts what's going to be on the next episode of the show. And this week, Zach's prediction was that Cobell would be assigned anger management, and that part of that would be that she would go and coach a ragtag group of hockey players
That's
known
right.
as the Mighty Ducks. And I was tagged in this, and I basically lost my mind.
That's
so
amazing.
yeah. So I was very excited about that. Zach, if you're curious about the Mighty Ducks, just reach out and I can send you
Hit us
a
up.
whole bunch of podcasts that you
Yeah.
might be a big fan of.
Yeah. From Mighty Ducks to Mighty Goats, right? You know, we've got
yeah.
it's a veritable zoo crew over here on Severance. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lots of fun stuff to be talking about in the
So much
Severance
fun
world
stuff.
right now.
Mhm.
We got to start wrapping it up here. I have still so many questions. I want to know
More
about
Q's
goat,
and A's.
goat
Yeah.
in the suit. I think seems like something that I would like to spend some
It's like
time
a
on.
Wicked crossover there.
Let it go. You know.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a different one. But yeah, that's it. That's what we're going to do. We're going to be back in a couple of days talking about episode 3 of Severance season 2.
Wow.
And we still have many more weeks to go with the Lumen crew. So I know we're having fun. We hope you're all having fun. Are we having fun yet?
Fun yet? Yeah.
We're having fun.
That was for Adam. I know he listens.
For a long-time listener, Adam Scott, new time podcaster. Make sure you're subscribed, not just to their podcast, but to ours. We know Severance.com. Each and every week, we're doing recaps right after the episodes, dropping on Friday mornings. We are also doing these theory and feedback shows as well. So go to WeKnowSeverance.com, search for We Know Severance in your podcatcher of choice. You'll never miss an episode. Leave a review and a rating if you could be so kind to do so. That would be very helpful for us. And of course, you want to get feedback in. Plenty of ways to do that. One of those ways is Severance, RHAP @gmail.com. That's Severance, RHAP @gmail.com. If you want to leave us any email feedback, you can also hit us up on social media. I'm at Round Howard on Blue Sky. Amanda, how can people find you?
You can find me. I am at Dr. Amanda R on Blue Sky, where I'm posting pictures of the Lumen perks that they're trying to woo me with right now. I got a sweet looking pineapple on the feed right now. And you can also follow my other podcast at Cry Laugh Pod on Blue Sky.
All right. And Melissa, where can people find you?
Yeah, Whirlwind Pods on social media. Me personally, Melissa Woodward 28. We're talking Doctor Who. We're talking Veronica Mars. We're approaching the end of season 2 of Veronica Mars. If you know, you know. It's a very exciting time. And unraveling all the mysteries of Veronica Mars, except I've already seen it, so we already know all the mysteries. But just to Kristen Bell loves Severance. I love Kristen Bell. It's just all a full circle moment.
Wow, it's like a throuple.
That's it. It's sort of like a podcast throuple. Well, thank you all for throupling up with this podcast, because I am certain that you are listening to this podcast and at least 2 others. So we appreciate your participation in this podcast throuple as we continue trucking through Severance Season 2. We'll be back in just a few days talking about Severance Season 2, Episode 3. Until then, take care. Bye-bye.